Good morning, Dimitri.
See you here virtually. This is the next installment of View from an Easel, or is it View from the Easel? I think it's View from the Easel.
I think it's the easel.
Yeah, today today we're featuring artist Nell Tenhaaf, who comes at her practice very differently than previous interview artists. She works primarily in, I want to say, electronic media, new media, all things related to technology. And I'm super excited, of course, because we're forced today to use technology. And I'd love to hear her opinions about all things Zoom and all things distant and isolating. But welcome this morning, Nell. Uh, can you tell us a little bit about your past? Where do you come from, and did you have a different kind of art practice before you started working digitally or
Right.
digitally?
Right. Well, given that I'm in my late 60s, this could be a bit of a long answer, but I'll try to condense. I'm actually from Ontario. I grew up in Oshawa, east of Toronto. And then I spent 25 years in Montreal. So this is the global picture. And then I was in the US teaching for 3 years. And then I came back to Ontario to teach at York. So that's the big trajectory. So I left Ontario to go to McGill in Montreal. And I was a bit of a math nerd. So I was in math. I went into second year math, but I hit the proverbial wall in that, I guess one would say, in my second year there. And after, it wasn't quite as smooth as one can make it sound in this backward-looking narrative, but ultimately, I got into fine arts at what was then Sir George Williams University. And of course, that was like, I didn't even do photography there. I did painting, drawing, printmaking, sculpture, all that kind of stuff. So actually, my favorite medium at that time was drawing, and that carried on for some time. I didn't really start working with technologies until, a good 10 years after finishing my undergrad. So, but the big thing of the 70s for me was being really active in Powerhouse Gallery, which was the feminist gallery in Montreal. Still exists, although it had to francisize its name, of course. So it's called La Centrale now. But I was, very sort of leadership involved there for until the early 80s, maybe 83 or so. So that was huge for me. That was really my formation and my coming out as an artist, and kind of at the time we were all grappling with whether content had to be feminist or that didn't matter, just the context was feminist. Those were those days. And after some time, I did a master's back at Sir George Concordia by then. That was in the late 80s. But this technology work, if you looked at some of this work, I know that the first medium I used was called Teledon, which was a government research program to develop an online information transmission protocol that was called NAPLPS, NAPLPS. And that research program was opened up to artists. They were running these field trials, which were mostly everything from business to education, but they, through, I guess, some lobbying on the part of artists, I don't think they spontaneously did this, but they opened up some field trials to artists. So it was pretty cool, so you could get on to their equipment.
And would you say this was early days of the internet? Is that?
This was, there's a really good documentary that I told you about that Vice did. They call us artists who were working in this medium, the sort of first internet artists. There was or the first web artists, excuse me. I think this is where the language, which is also hard to do in backwards narrative, but there was already internet, academic and military based, communications networks were already set up. And if you were in one of those institutions, you could be on the internet. But there was no web. Of course, the web was, what was the web? Very early 90s, I think. So this idea of doing something graphical, the internet was all typed emails, basically, information and text information. And this idea of doing graphics, was a kind of proto, and not that many of the artists, really got into that aspect of it. They saw it as a way of making imagery, moving imagery, but in this weird kind of chunky graphic. I did see it as a way, well, two things. One, like I liked the idea of doing something artistic in a network outside of the gallery network. I was always a bit of a rebel, still am. And two, the fact that, it was this computer-based, that was this kind of mysterious access via a terminal of information that was located at a distance and you didn't know where,
And so 1983 was a transitional year for you, because was that when you left Montreal and came to Toronto, or was that when you started?
Oh, no. I was still in, I actually started spending more time in Toronto, but no, I lived in Montreal until I left for the US in 1994. So I was there all that time from 69 till 94. I really identified as a Montrealer, and I could even say a Quebecoise. I was very immersed in the culture there, and so which was very special because it is so different from here. Yeah, but
pardon me. At that time, were there major influences in terms of the transition to technology-based work?
Oh, interesting. I would say more in stuff that I was reading, whatever that might be. I didn't prep with, my memory's not that good on this stuff. I didn't prep with any names here, but the sort of French thinkers, right, who were thinking a lot about technology, like Lyotard, that crew, or Latour, and so I think it was more that. I didn't really have a good awareness. There was other stuff going on in the parallel gallery scene, artist-run center scene. For example, there were people at the Western Front in Vancouver that were heavily involved in this slow scan stuff. I think that was basically kind of a fax-based premise. And I have a good friend, Giselle Trudel in Montreal, who, for her, it came out of mail art. It came out of the idea that you could exchange things with other people, again, outside of the gallery system in some way.
Well, it's interesting that genre or that mode of expression still is used today by some artists. So since you've, how should we put it, benefited from early retirement, let's just say, how is this new space of having, primarily now working not just as you were in education for a long time at York University, but what is I'm jumping now from the early days to
go for it. Yeah, good idea.
What are you inspired by today, and what are your thoughts about technology?
Well, I think going back, there's a through line going back that I've mentioned to you, which is a kind of lo-fi, almost anti-tech, or it's at least anti-new tech philosophy in my work, and I'm still there. And right now I'm refurbishing some work from some of it like 15 years ago. That is based on LED boards. So, in the LED board, you see a very, very low res picture, video usually. And you have to kind of squint and try to see it there. Is it really in there? So yeah, I pursue that. The format varies. I mean, I I'm starting to do a bit of video work, and probably will just use video or something to just disseminate. But these other works are kind of big and almost like too big gallery museum works. So I still have a hope after COVID passes to get those shown. I mean, I'm interested in continuing to show. I mean, the interesting thing about the kinds of work I've done since the early 2000s is that they can be programmed and reprogrammed. I mean, I can, and I'm doing that. Like if I don't like the, the content or the story or the impact of it, I just start again and plug something else into it. So they're kind of vessels, for what I want to say.
But I think there's also a tradition of artists revisiting their works and painting over what they painted or fixed. I mean, even Da Vinci worked on the Mona Lisa apparently for many years. So you said something really interesting to me. You said that people had to squint or work hard at seeing the image. Like actually, you're almost not forcing, but asking of the viewer, the participant, to make some effort, as opposed to how technology is used day to day, which is to make our lives easier or more streamlined, and hence it infiltrates without us noticing in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's a screenal world, there are screens everywhere, and that is just intensifying and intensifying. And it's not that I hate it, or I just don't work in that medium because it's not where I can find my own position, and it's not that it needs to be a critique of that necessarily. It's just it's a different way of asking someone to understand, how information flows, basically.
You mentioned earlier that you started in the feminist 1970s world with work in Montreal, and in a way that was kind of work of resistance as well, or challenging. So that mood or that way of thinking and feeling and making, it sounds like it's important. Art, not just just as background. And we don't often think about technology as changing us, but it obviously, and in your work, that it does change us, either prosthetically, or it kind of it's brought into the mind's eye, and we perceive the world differently as a result of all of this invisible technology. But your work also has kind of a biological, right word, but can you tell us or describe how that?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I had what I call my biology period. What was that? That was, I would say, the late 80s until probably the mid 90s, and it was infused by that work was a wish to critique science as objective and able to take people's bodies as kind of neutral, as a space for experimentation, obviously. And then it ended when I got really fed up with this, being a kind of little mouse in the big machine trying to go like, hey, look at me. It's just a really hard project in several ways. It's a hard, as people who've written about my work have pointed out, you need to kind of put yourself back into what science was doing at that moment to know what I'm saying, right? What did we know at that point, or what were the prevailing views? I mean, the prevailing view on genetics, which is what I was working with, the image of DNA, the DNA chain a lot. The prevailing view of genetics was this kind of master molecule idea, or the master code, that honestly, it's hard to even think now because it has so changed. But at the time, definitely it was seen as like the total key to everything, you know, and you could just like unlock that code and bingo, solve everything. So yeah, so it was a critique of that idea, and it was really based on putting the subject into science. Not always myself, but often myself, or sometimes myself. There's a work that I think of as almost the culmination of that period, because it moves away a little bit from this need to understand where science was at, and it shows me reclining. It's called The Solitary Begets Yourself, Keeping All 8 Cells. It shows me reclining. It's a 12-foot long piece, and narrow this way. People have said that it reminds many people of a Christ in the tomb, which, you know, did not enter my thinking at the time of making it. Pardon?
I thought it was referencing sort of the reclining nude.
It does. Yeah. It's a reclining nude, and yeah, it has a little story to it as well, but it's a little bit less loaded than some of this. Ooh, sorry, playing with my microphone. This double helix work, and yeah, that has to do with in vitro fertilization, and the fact that, you know, one of the cells is taken out at the 8-cell stage of the zygote, and so I'm protesting the idea that the zygote remains the same when a thing is removed from it, even though in theory it does remain the same. So, you know, again, it has to do with how one inhabits one's body in the face of the medical and the scientific. So it's not an anti-IVF statement, but yeah, so there was that whole period, and there was so much interest in art and science and art and biology. So that work got picked up quite a lot, that whole kind of stretch of work in terms of shows and reproductions and articles and all this kind of stuff. But I did drop it and move on to a more, I would have to say, computationally based approach to living processes, living systems by the mid-90s.
Thing that I was hearing there was that some art, if it's too tied to a specific discovery or progress in a related field or a field of your interest, might not be relevant years later, because it's so. But then, you know, I guess if we want to work a little harder, we could go back to that time.
Yeah, you could go back or see if there's enough of a level of abstraction in it that it tells you something more generalized, I guess one would say, you know, like about gender, you know, for example, you know, yeah, pull something out of it.
But I think going back to older technologies is a way of bypassing that, perhaps, and that you were saying about lo-fi, you were talking about lo-fi and embracing that. Is there a connection between the kind of, you know, people who, you know, embrace, let's say, vinyl and records and desiring, or is that just purely kind of a nostalgic thing? I don't think it is purely nostalgic, but you know, I guess Marshall McLuhan also spoke a little bit about that, and I didn't do the research to discuss.
Yeah, the old the older technology inhabiting the new, always inhabiting the new. Yeah.
And that's really because of our psychology, right? Like our need or our way of understanding the world. Are there new technologies on the horizon that we should be, you know, prepared for or worried about?
Yeah. Well, that are here already. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm hoping that in this piece, Flow and Glow, that I'm reworking right now, that I'm, because I'm using the word, that I'm talking in some way about optimization, you know, the process of filtering data and applying algorithms to it, and this is machine learning. I mean, these techniques that are being worked on, the huge amounts of data that are culled from Facebook and Google that we all know about, and the problems of our privacy in the process. Although they're so aggregated that in most of these processes you can't really get back down to the individual again. But yeah, so that's already in our lives. Definitely, it's like the current form of AI. People call it AI, but it's really more specifically machine learning. And so I don't use machine learning because I would need somebody to do that. Not that I haven't collaborated, a lot in the past with people who have more tech skills than me. I must send a shout out to my computer science partner in this lo-fi project that started in the mid 2000s, Melanie Balco. She's in computer science at York. So not that I haven't worked with people who know a lot of stuff in this domain, but I'm not really, people are using it in art, machine learning. For example, they'll construct, let's say, a little set of robots that have some behavior, and then over time, the behavior changes because the robots are learning how to work with each other, this kind of thing. But, you have to think about it. It's just it's got so many problems still built into it. I mean, people don't spend, 12 hours in front of an artwork watching how its behavior changes. So I don't know the answer to those things. It's not my world, but that's happening. I'd like to be saying something about that, in a more lo-fi and direct and I guess more simple way. I'm not really interested in launching any major projects that dip into that. But yeah, that's the zone of now, I think.
Right. And ultimately it's about communicating something to the person visiting the piece who has maybe 20 minutes.
Exactly. And exactly. So yeah, although I think those zones are rich, I think they're kind of performative in some way, and the venues have to be worked out for that, and the what you tell the audience, like what, if they can't, I mean, I think too that people see effect in that, but there's no way you can enter with the process. I mean, the programmers at this point can't actually enter back into all the processes. That is the scary part of this zone, right? This is the new AI where you can't reverse engineer everything because you've set it up in a system that is so complex and is working on so much data that there's no way that you can actually make a line through what has happened there. So yeah, I mean, I watch it, I watch that, but I'm more interested in trying to say something.
It reminds me of, I don't know if we talked about this before, but it reminds me of the Greek myth of the labyrinth, and how Daedalus invented or designed the labyrinth to contain the Minotaur, which represented nature. And ultimately, the labyrinth was designed, technology was designed so well that Daedalus himself got lost.
Very good. That's nice. Yes, yes, yeah.
The idea ties in exactly what you're referring to. We lose control, or somebody gains control.
Yeah.
Of it, somebody else, some other entity, and usually it doesn't have a face to it, but it has a corporate name to it, or
right.
in a nation. In the past, I suppose it would have been the king had control over technology and was able to control people. But so really, it's not so much about privacy as you said earlier, because ultimately all of that's amalgamated anyway. So for privacy, it's more about control.
Yes, it is. That's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And then and what's fed back to you, that is sort of like a feedback loop, where something is pulled out of that and you're told that this is, it's fed back to you, right?
You're in your own quantum universe, changing, evolving with the stuff that's being fed to you, and you're being changed, but you're not aware of it, and there's no going back. It's not,
exactly.
No, it's not a pretty picture, is it?
No, it's not. But humans are very adaptive creatures, and you know, everybody knows that, you know, younger people are not as scared by this as us older people are, some of us. And there, you know, and there are always pockets. There's always pockets where people make some kind of resistance, and, you know, that will continue to be figured out. And yeah, whether that's called art or not, that's another interesting thing. It's not necessarily called art, but yeah, in a lot of ways, it's allied with the aspirations of art.
Well, we both now live in the country, and there is the advantage or the kind of position that it allows us is to look back or look to the urban environment and be a little bit, you know, distant and see. And we're also amongst folks here in the rural setting that rely on technology, obviously, to work or to entertain more, rather than the urban condition, which has proximity. But also, there are folks who specifically are, especially maybe because of COVID, are leaving the city because it's too expensive, there's nothing to do there, and they are changing. So, like, I think the optimist in you, Nell, I mean, I'm sensing, you know, you do have some belief in human capacity to resist and to you know, improve. I mean, these technologies initially are also designed with good intentions, right? So, you know, the early days of the internet was supposed to be about access and, you know, a more democratic approach to more democratic than it is now, which is it's very controlled, and we don't have a lot to say about it. We sign up when we sign up for Google or Zoom on their terms.
Yeah. I know, like, imagine the first excitement of sharing research online. Yeah, exactly. Imagine that. I mean,
and people, I think the hopeful part there is people want that. They want to feel that they're safe and that their children can grow and become full human beings. So, you know, whether it's farming, like people returning to kind of the old tech, the old way of farming in order to avoid, you know, hazards, or perhaps, you know, I mean, you know, bicycles are technology that are, you know, it's obviously not as fast to get around on a bicycle, but, you know, it's nice to see, even in, let's say, our closest city, which is Toronto, that the bike lanes are continually being added and grown. And then, of course, there is the real hard part is to parse out things like Sidewalk Labs, or the Google city that was planned but nixed in Toronto. Do you have any words of wisdom about that?
Well, I didn't follow it that closely, but in my guts, I was glad it was nixed, because, you know, one was reading that, yeah, there was this sense of, you know, surveillance kind of taking over that space. And yeah, I don't know whether this is fact or not, but there didn't seem to be enough community involvement, or I guess because it's not a community, it's down there on the lakeshore, right? So yeah, it was kind of outside of community involvement. That kind of occupation of space is not really my trip, but yeah, I think that obviously, you know, there's the same kind of pressures or whatever, you know, to consider high-tech solutions, right, to our living spaces. And you must really feel that, you know, like, sure. Yeah, I you know, Google, I guess, like, people, as I understand it, are so divided. Some people, like, really love the idea of being in some kind of global aggregate of data, you know, under this huge American corporate umbrella. And then some of us, I mean, I just don't even like uploading, you know, I don't work in Creative Cloud when I'm in my Premiere or Photoshop. Like, I don't like I don't know why. It's not a fear of losing my data. I mean, that's a little part of it. But yeah, I have a resistance to the idea that there's a well, when we were chatting the other day, I used the word utopic, that there's some, utopic solution, right, to any problem. And so that would include built spaces, right? I mean, we've been through utopias in architecture, and it's resulted in some really interesting stuff. But I would suspect that in this technology utopia of architecture, one would experience a problem of the already old, very quickly, right? Like the very novel solution of the breathable, alive space.
I mean, I think of them as being overly ornate, like fixtures. It's very. Let's move on. Let's move on.
Yeah, let's move on. Yeah.
Would you say that your work is more interested in terms of space, interior? You mentioned dwelling and our dwelling spaces. Well, because I mean, I think of your work as being an interior work to a certain degree. It's the inside of the technology. It's the inside of our bodies or the interface between technology and our bodies that interests you. And maybe the boundaries would then be perhaps for your work is the sort of immediate space around us, not so much the public space.
Yeah. I would say so. Yeah.
Have you ever done public artwork?
No. I almost did a public artwork. In fact, the sculptures, the electronic sculptures that I'm reworking now were originally destined for a really interesting project at a place called St. Norbert Arts Center, which is a suburb of Winnipeg, which is an old Trappist monastery, really cool place. They ran artist residencies. And so this was in the early 90s, I guess. And is that when it was? Oh, it doesn't matter when it was. Just too big a sidebar. But so that they wanted to install this organic wastewater treatment system called the Living Machine. There's a famous guy whose name I can't get right now, American, who developed this technology. So your water would go through these plant-based systems of purification. And I was to put in these pieces of mine that would sort of animate or comment on. But boy, and that project fell through. And in retrospect, I was thinking about this just the other day. I thought, boy, that's probably a really good thing, because I actually don't have the skills, having never done it. It's a whole genre unto itself. You need to really understand how to make something robust for whether indoors or outdoors, like totally robust. Yeah, this is the problem of the living architecture space. Like, how can you make it that robust, right? That it's actually going to go on and on and on. It's very challenging.
Yeah. Well, or is it just artwork that has a lifespan, and whether that lifespan is just 2 months outside and it falls apart because of the sun, or whether it's 20 years,
right?
Ultimately, everything does have a lifespan, and what is temporary artwork versus permanent is
right.
Not a simple question.
Right. I've made lots of work that I think is just uncollectible because it would require so much upkeep and kind of, again, this reverse engineering ability, although they're not that complicated. And I know lots of artists who've made works like that too, that are challenging even in the moment, to keep going and keep together. And some artists philosophy around this is that you upgrade constantly. My philosophy is that you just have the machinery that runs this thing, and then when that stops running, forget it. The thing is over. But it could run for a very, very long time on that basis. But that is very challenging in the world of electronic media.
Of the Rosetta Stone, which they discovered as a link between. I think this is what the Rosetta Stone was, a link between Greek language and ancient Egyptian. I think there was some sort of translating
The translator. Yeah.
Wrong about that, but they didn't understand the technology Rosetta Stone for many years until it was cracked. And even then, I'm not sure I'm telling the story correctly, but that becomes this artifact in a museum without being decipherable for eons, for a long time, and then suddenly somebody down the road comes along, or like it's like a time capsule, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah.
That works.
Yeah. Yeah. So that these works are collected, but yeah, it's very, very particular, how that's done. And I don't have high expectations for, I mean, I just didn't build them in a robust enough way. You have to have that perspective from the outset. I like process. I just kind of, it just sort of, there's the idea and there's the shape, and then there's the building, which farming out some stuff, and then there's the putting together, and it's.
Well, I mean, that's how Robert Rauschenberg worked.
Exactly. That's the thing. It's such a basic, right? It's
he
such a
plan
exactly
work to fall apart, but they have to spend keeping
yeah.
It keeps people employed in museums too.
That's right.
I mean, there's a whole, you could go to university to study conservation.
Exactly. So there's going to be people who are interested. So yeah, we'll see, or we won't. Someone else will see.
One thing that strikes me about your work is it's very much not an act of it's not isolating, or your process is one of connecting with, obviously we talk about collaborators, but it isn't it's far from being a pure expression, like internal expression. It has a lot to do with the world and perception, and thinking about what we make, like what we produce. Because although you work primarily in electronic media, if you think about technology as a kind of theme, everything that we use and produce technology, including the space that you in, your space, is really intriguing to me. You've got this long vista through a portal, and then there's this mysterious room beyond, and then there's a window, and it looks like a window, but is it art? Because there's light.
It's a window, but it could be art. I've made a lot of light box art, so that's the point. Yeah. Maybe that's why I put it there as a little reference that I hadn't even thought of.
If you look at my space, I've got this natural, clearly I'm living in an old space, and you're playing with perceptions of new light and light that's ambiguous, which I think it's really interesting I'd love when COVID is over for you to give me a tour of your studio. I mean, if I could
absolutely
invite myself over and talk about intersections, because I think that's how we learn, right? So, and I think your work is filled with intersections, from your earliest days, in feminist practice, if you will, to working with other people, to collaborating with scientists. I mean, that's pretty exciting, and it keep despite the isolation that we're living in now, I feel quite connected with you. So I thank you.
Me too. Yeah.
On that note, thank you for this time. We hope to share this little video that we've created today in short time with people in other spaces through the miracle of the internet, etc. But do drop by, come by when you can, and
will do. Yeah.
Ciao.